And so now they understand, okay, I have these risks to CIA, and now I understand more about what you do. And that story went a lot easier than, let me tell you about the number of dormant accounts in Active Directory. They're going, what? Who cares?
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Ed Marchewka, Director, Information and Technology Services at Gift of Hope.
So when I got out of the Navy, when I was doing my undergrad, I started off in physical security and then transitioned into the IT world, where I started coming up through infrastructure. And it was in there while I was with Thermo Fisher Scientific that I got loaned out to the corporate security team to remediate a global pen test. So all the pen test findings were given to me, and I was instructed to work with our entities around the world to fix those issues or document the exception for a report to the CIO, who would end up reporting out to the executive group. From there, I took over a IT and computer forensics function with the International Academy of Design and Technology. So running that group got me more involved in the IT and computer forensics side of the world. And then took over as the information security manager, functionally the CISO for Chicago Public Schools, which really threw me into this industry. And then now I'm serving as the Director of Information Technology Services, the CIO for Gift of Hope Organ and Tissue Donor Network. It's been a 20-year journey since I got out of the Navy in security in some realm, either physical or information security.
Yeah, it seems like the military has some really good training. A lot of very good people in this field seem to come out of the military.
Yeah, there's been a handful of vets that I've interacted with, and it's not even necessarily the job-specific training. I was a nuke by training, but it's the understanding and the thought processes. I was just talking with my team about some of the training we went through as a nuke, and it was understanding how the entire environment worked. In information security, you have to understand how everything works together, not only the IT pieces, the information security pieces, but also the business and how one thing is going to impact the other. And I credit my Navy and nuke training to that, of having that mental fortitude to be able to grasp the concept of what's going on in the entire environment.
Well, thank you for your service. Did you find any real differences between the military environment and then moving into a corporate environment that you've had to navigate and learn from?
The biggest challenge for me was just the discipline that comes with being in the military and people understanding what it is they should be doing, knowing what they need to do. And my transition was somewhat easier because I went into physical security, which had that somewhat governmental military type feel to it. But then going into the corporate world, there were some adjustments to be made. But we get through it.
Yeah. And I've had teams where I've had, somebody from the Army, somebody from the Navy, somebody from the Air Force, and I used to joke with them. I said, well, if I had one good Marine around here, but they didn't think that was very funny. So I don't use that joke anymore. But I found the discipline, was really beneficial, especially when you're dealing with a lot of government regulations that that all had to be met. They seem to really almost have an advantage in tackling some of those issues. Have you found that as well?
I think it just comes from the ability or that mentality that's instilled into you to follow those rules and procedures. When, especially in the nuke plant, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, a lot of bad can happen very, very fast. And also, on an aircraft carrier and a submarine, if there's no propulsion, you're dead in the water. So keeping that plant safe not only keeps power and a lot of conveniences, but it also makes sure that your warfighting capabilities are fully there.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you. And you've moved into different things. I know now you're not just leading the security function for Gift of Hope, but you're also leading the IT function as well.
Yes. Yeah, it was going from Chicago Public Schools to Gift of Hope was definitely a step down in scale, but it was a step up in scope. So before I was focused on information security in the server environment, and now I am focused on the entire computing environment. So it's making sure not only is it secure, but we're maintaining availability and doing what's right by the business to ensure that donation happens. Because when donation happens, lives are saved.
Well, I've always felt that every job contributes to our careers, and so it's great that that they have you, that somebody that has that security background leading an IT area. I'm sure that's had a lot of benefits for them as well.
It has, because of a lot of the regulations that we fall under between the FDA, some of our lab environments. Luckily, we don't necessarily have HIPAA as an overbearing, but we still have to follow a lot of the privacy regulations around that. Coming from that security mindset, and really it's not even just security, it's that risk management mindset. We're able to introduce a lot of things that people haven't thought about, where it's like, hey, when it comes to risk, this is where we should think about. And that's helped us make a lot of decisions and navigate the field we're in.
Excellent. Well, let's move into your piece. So you wrote a piece about security metrics to measure program effectiveness. And I liked how you laid it out and, about the different types and metrics needed by different audiences. So could you walk us through, through what you were putting forth in your write-up?
You bet. What I really tried to get across was that any CISO is going to have different audiences, and I say it all the time. It's the story that you have to tell. The CSO has to be the chief storytelling officer, because they're talking to so many different audiences with respect to what they're doing. And in one direction, they're talking to engineers and analysts, and they have to get real detailed into the weeds and be able to fully have those conversations with those people. Otherwise, there may be a loss of credibility or lack of leadership viewed, because they just can't talk the talk and don't have the understanding of what those engineers and analysts do. And so that's one direction. The other direction, though, is to the executive team and potentially, in many cases, to the board, and how those tactical metrics are impacting the business and the overall function and mission of the company. And so you can't necessarily go to the board or the executive team and talk about very technical details. And so what I mentioned in the piece is the need to aggregate those metrics into something that shows the impact to the business. And what I had done at Chicago Public Schools was I used the idea of just CIA, and so confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and taking my tactical metrics and rolling it up into those to be able to tell the story. And so instead of saying, oh, we've had so many firewall hits and we've got these issues with our wireless access points, et cetera, I would say we have an impact to confidentiality risk of student data. And then the response is, well, okay, but what's the impact? Well, if we have a breach of student data, we have a confidentiality loss, we put at risk $3 billion of federal funding, at which point they pay attention. So now I've taken information security risk and tactical things, aggregated it into something that the business pays attention to and cares about. And so now their response is, well, how do I lower that confidentiality risk? Well, what we need to do is we put funds, time, people towards these tactical items. That should lower our risk. And it's a much easier conversation instead of starting off with, we had 10 million firewall hits. Great. What does that mean to us? How does that impact us? And in that specific example, you can look at an aggregation up into availability. If the firewall is getting beaten on, there may be a traffic or denial of service issue, at which point computing can't happen. There's a lot of classroom instruction that happens via online learning and collaboration, especially CPS had gone with Google for Education. If they can't get online because the internet pipe is filled up for a denial of service attack, well, now student learning is coming to a halt. And when student learning doesn't happen, someone has to talk to the mayor. And we've invested a lot of money in these technologies. Students and parents are expected to use it. So now we have a reputational risk because of this availability issue.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers.
So now they understand, okay, I have these risks to CIA, and now I understand more about what you do. And that story went a lot easier than, let me tell you about the number of dormant accounts in Active Directory. They're going, what? Who cares?
Yeah, and don't you find it's hard, like X number of dormant accounts? How do they make any sense of whether 10 million's good, 20 million's good, or it should be 5,000?
Well, and that's where it's that story. So when you're talking with executives on the board, you're not even bringing up those metrics because you're talking about the aggregated overall risk. But when you're talking with the technical team, that's where you can either, as the CISO and the expert, leverage in of what those numbers should look like in your environment, but also leveraging the engineers and analysts and saying, well, let's go with the number of dormant accounts, right? You could say, well, we have 50 dormant accounts in our environment. Oh, that's 50 accounts that haven't been accessed in 90 days. Yeah, but how many users are there? At Chicago Public Schools, we have 440,000 users. 50 dormant accounts? That's probably people on leave. Okay, not a big deal. And at Gift of Hope, I got 320 users. If 50 of them are dormant, wait, that's a lot of people. That's a large percentage. So that's the other thing with metrics too, is I have a test to see whether or not they're good. I call it CCT Bang S. Can you control it? Can you change it? Is it timely? And is it not shocking? And so, like the 10 million firewall, well, that's a shock metric. That's a good denominator to make a percentage. And then it becomes not shocking and it turns into more of a good metric. Same thing with dormant accounts. Instead of counting pure dormant accounts, percentage of dormant accounts. And figuring out where your risk is to tolerate certain percentages. Some companies may say we're only going to tolerate 2% to be dormant. Others are going to say we'll go up to 10% because we've evaluated the risk and think that the impact will not impact us that much.
So how would you take something like, a lot of people track things like, number of vulnerabilities or critical vulnerabilities, the time to mitigate those vulnerabilities. How would you take a metric like that and then translate into something that would be relevant for the board? So what I like to do with those is, individually they're not telling the story. It's just saying the number of vulnerabilities you have, okay, but at what severity and how quickly is it taking to remediate them, and how many are remote code execution, how many require physical access. So the group of them tell a story, almost like financial statements. The balance sheet tells one story, the cash flow statement tells another, the income statement tells another, but all together they paint a much better picture. And so it's taking all that information and then aggregating that in. And then there's varying ways to do so. What I like to do is figure out how I'm going to aggregate up,
anywhere from 3 to 6 aggregated business level metrics like confidentiality or people, financial, integrity, availability, reputation risk. Those are all general broad business concepts. Against each tactical metric, weight those. So you can say, well, number of vulnerabilities is going to impact confidentiality, availability, probably a reputation risk, and maybe a financial risk. So it's going to impact 4 of my high-level metrics. And then you do that for each of the tactical ones. What you can end up doing is then creating a score based on those weightings for each category. So confidentiality will have a score, people risk will have a score, finance risk and reputation risk, availability, etc. And then those scores can roll up. And when they roll up, what you end up reporting on is how big the overall risk is. So basically, you're taking almost like a radar cross-section. You're saying, this is how big this, let's just use an analogy of like a B-2 bomber, real big airplane. And you say, this is how big it is. But by applying these risk controls and mitigations, we can actually cover that and make the radar signature much smaller. So we can say how well we're covering confidentiality, how well we're covering our people risk, how well we're covering our financial risk. And then understanding the gap in comparison to the other risks that are in the environment. So some businesses tend to focus on one weighting or one of the key risk benefit measures than the other. So I've seen like hospitals tend to focus on confidentiality and financial risk. And then sometimes they'll maybe lean towards like their people risk because they don't want to overly inconvenience doctors or patients to get information, but they still have to protect it. At the same time, I'll see like retail, they're going to be focused on reputation and availability. We have to be up and people have to be able to shop and they have to trust us with their data. Everything else can come later. So you find out what the business most cares about, balance the risk around that, and then prioritize against time, people, and money. How much time, people, and money is it going to take to manage the risks with the direction of the organization?
I mean, I like that, how you're looking at different industries and looking at, what those different metrics are. Because I think a common question that gets asked is, what metrics should I be reporting up? I mean, if you had to say, what do you think are like the top 5, 3 things, 5 things that seem to run across most senior executives that they want to know about?
So this question comes up a lot, and I don't like to report any tactical metrics to senior executives or the board. They can be in the appendices, and if someone really wants to geek out and talk about that, let's do it. But from a high-level perspective, I always like to report out on those aggregated metrics, and this is what I find most people care about. So you have your traditional CIA, which are going to be your information security and IT aggregation, but then you cross that over with the impact to the business side. So now we have the crossover of security and IT, of CIA, with people, reputation, and finance. Those 6 are what I recommend most people aggregate into. So you have confidentiality, people, integrity, reputation, availability, and finance. When you're reporting up through those 6, you're hitting every area of the business. The CFO is looking at the financial and confidentiality risk, and they've got a little bit of purview into that reputation piece. General counsel, assuming they're an executive, they usually are looking at their confidentiality and finance risk. Human resource, the CHRO, is looking at confidentiality of people's data or employee data, and the people risk. What is the impact of what information security is to people? The COO is looking at, again, the people risk, but now they're looking at integrity, because if their reporting is not right, the COO can't report out properly, and they can't make decisions with respect to operations. The CMO is looking at, again, integrity, because they need to make decisions on marketing based on reporting, but also the reputation. CMO is highly focused on reputation of the organization. And then, of course, the CEO, while he cares, or they care about all of it, they're going to be looking at availability and reputation. And because if the company has a bad reputation and it's not around, why do they exist? And so each of those are hitting the key points or the key areas of the C-suite.
That is really excellent. And what I really like what you did with that is just looking at your stakeholders and looking at each person and saying, what is it that they need? Not what I need as a security person for my program, which is important, but we're really turning the tables around with your metrics and saying, how do I make them feel good or uncomfortable with where security's at in the organization?
Exactly. And then you end up getting them polling for their metric, the thing they care about. So if the CFO and the general counsel are both like, we need to focus on finance, but the CMO is saying, well, what about character? We need to pull back a little bit from just focusing on the dollars. Let's talk about the reputation of the organization. And then the human resource, like, yeah, but what about the impact of people? We need to balance this. We need to make sure that we're staying in line with the priorities of the organization.
Well, this has been very insightful, Edward, and I really appreciate you taking the time and your contribution to the CISO Compass book. I think this really helps people as they're building out their security programs. So thank you very much.
You bet, Todd. It was a pleasure, and I have to thank you for the opportunity to be a contributor to it. It's a fabulous piece of work, and it's an honor to be amongst the group of people who got to be part of this endeavor.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.